Well, good afternoon, and Vince, thank you. Those are kind words. Sometimes you want introductions to go on longer than they actually do. It's an honor to be here. I've always been a real big fan of Waterloo, and since I've got to know Vince and Wes Graham and Doug Wright a lot better over the last few months, I can now realize how these people have put their own personality into the university and how their understanding of the commercialization of all your technology here has played a role in shaping the personality of the institution. It's interesting to me that every time I've got close to the Microsoft executive team in Redmond, they relate Canada to the wonderful, brilliant engineers they hire from Waterloo. So one of my missions, goals here today is to stop that. I'm going to focus my talk today on the role that venture capital should play in and what you can do to answer this question. What is it that needs to be accomplished in order to turn the Toronto-Waterloo corridor into an environment that creates as many opportunities as you can have in Silicon Valley? And that's a tough question. And I guess I'm given the opportunity to speak to you, and it really is a privilege to be at this university because I've been an entrepreneur for the last 20 years. I must probably have a unique perspective of entrepreneurship because recently, the last 12, 13 months, I turned into a venture capitalist. And also, I guess I'm lucky. It seems like yesterday I went home and I said to my wife, I got this really good group of engineers. We're going to do a startup. You just have to come up with a name. And she said, you guys struggle with the stupidest things. You take Dennis and Laura, and she came up with the name Delrina. She's just good at names. She actually, she calls me somebody. You know, it's always somebody take the garbage out, somebody cut the lawn. But I'm going to stick to the topic, and I can get focused on being too funny. I became a venture capitalist for two real reasons. I think there's a great need out there for venture capital. 10 years ago, when I went to look for venture capital in Toronto, there actually wasn't a venture capital community. So I want to make this point abundantly clear. There's tons of money out there today. Today we have as much money in Toronto per capita as you would have anywhere in the US. So there's enough money. And the venture capital community's come a long way. When I went out 10 years ago to look for money for the arena, no venture capitalists would give us money in Toronto. That you couldn't find any to speak to. Eventually found a distant group of shareholders on the Toronto Stock Exchange that were really annoyed with management and asked us to come in and virtually take over the company, and that's how we got our money. Today there's plenty of money, but there's a real lack of value-added venture capital. We were talking over lunch with some of your colleagues, and it really is a shame that venture capitalists get a bad rap, because they really have never been in the trenches. They don't understand the challenges. They don't understand enough about what it takes in the industry to build great companies. And I felt that we could form XDL to utilize the experience and know-how of a few people that had actually been in the trenches in order to provide capital and all the knowledge that you need to take great ideas and build great companies. And the second main reason I wanted to become a venture capitalist, that I was eager to be part of this digital revolution that we're all going through. I wanted to be part of the new economy. And I felt that it was a really exciting time to be around when there are so many great companies that are going to be created that you must probably never heard of today because they most likely don't exist, or they're still so small. They're going to have a chance to flourish because we're about to embark in, or we must probably have begun to enter this digital revolution. And I think most people here know about it, and on the campus everyone's totally familiar about these things. But out there, when I think of a lot of the managers and people running organizations and running government in particular, it always reminds me of this Far Side cartoon where you see two pilots in the cockpit, and the one pilot turns to the other and says, "Why are there mountain goats in the clouds?" You got to think about that. But there are many leaders out there that have no idea of what's going to happen to them in the next little while. They just don't recognize what transformation is about to take place. These are the same people that had a lot of trouble anticipating the year 2000 was coming. So they have a Y2K problem with their technology. And either they don't want to face up to the facts, or they just don't like technology, period. So I'd like to speak a bit about, as a venture capital, where I see things are going and where this digital revolution is coming from. And I don't know if many people yet understand Moore's law or Metcalfe's law, but maybe it's worth our while just going through this, because these laws give us some very basic rules that are a pretty reliable measure to anticipate what technological changes are going to take place and how they're going to influence our future. Gordon Moore, who was a founder of Intel 30 years ago, his law is very straightforward. Every 18 months, we're going to double the processing power that we have at a consistent price. And that's easy to understand how PCs have continued to become that much more powerful. And Metcalfe's law is a little different. This is Robert Metcalfe. He founded 3Com. He's the father of the internet. His is the usefulness of a utility or a network equals a square of the number of users. And the internet is a primary example of it. It means the more people who use your software, use your network, the more valuable it becomes, the more users it will attract, and so it becomes even much more readily adopted by still more users. And the internet can't be a better example of how we formed this law prior to him actually understanding how the internet would absolutely work. And so we're entering an age where we're going to have a relentless act, a series of acts connecting everything to everything else. There's going to be a new networked economy. It'll be decentralized, anti-hierarchical, and it will change everything that we do. And it'll be the most important force shaping the next decade. It's going to change our politics. It's going to change our societies. It's going to change our culture. But before it does any of these things, it will change business. It's going to alter the way we distribute our products, we advertise our wares, we create new businesses, we communicate with one another. And if I can give you a few examples of just a few common thoughts and phrases that we use and how the new economy is going to be altered by the existing rules today, or maybe has been altered already. In the old economy, we spoke about a skill. In the new economy, we're going to refer to lifelong learning. The old economy was about labor versus management. It's now teams. Old was business versus environment. It's now going to be encouraging growth. The old was security. It's now risk-taking. Old was monopolies. It's now competition. It used to be job preservation. It's now job creation. It used to be wages. It's now all about ownership and options. It used to be plant and equipment. It's now intellectual property. It used to be the government ignores technology. Today, the Department of Justice is suing Microsoft. It used to be status quo. It's now speed and change. It was standardization in order to get your economies to scale. Today, it's custom and it's choice. It used to be top-down, and the hierarchies change. It's now totally distributed. It used to be regulation, and today it's private-public partners. It used to be zero-sum, and now we have to have one win-win to move at this speed. We used to have national interests. It's now global interest. And just by going through these phrases and seeing how things have changed, you get an idea of the impact of this new economy on business. And if we drill down a little further, you understand how businesses are going to be forced into creating lower and lower costs for every transaction. The internet will allow us to have the various parts of a transaction reduced to extremely low costs. And if you look at the parts of a transaction, the search costs where people find one another, the information costs where you then exchange information to see if there's a transaction here. Then you bargain. You exchange emails, phone calls, meetings, so you get the bargaining costs lowered. The decision costs, the internal processing has become that much more economical. The policing costs, where you actually now enforce the rules of whatever agreement you've made, and then there's even at some point enforcement costs. If you don't agree, this happens. Well, there's a digital network out there that's going to lower these costs dramatically. And it's going to force businesses to be competitive, because as one company in an industry starts to lower their costs, the speed and the pace of change will have to be at the pace of the fastest adopter of this technology. And so we're going to see another revolution take place. And if you look at the PC revolution, I try to see it in three different phases. The first wave that we experienced was we automated the front end. The second wave, we automated the back end. And the third wave, which is most probably larger than the first two combined, will be where we network this entire enchilada. That's what we're about to do right now. And it's very complex to be a VC in this environment and to be someone who's got a business side to this as opposed to the engineering side and get going. Even the world's most recognized or the world's most successful investors have a hard time recognizing what the price is that they ought to put on these companies betting on the internet. And I was reading a quote from Warren Buffett who is most probably the world's most successful investor at his annual general meeting this year. He said if he was teaching a class on the final exam, he would take an internet company, would ask his students to put a value on the actual company. And anyone who would answer, he would flunk. So there you go. It's tough. It's really tough. But if you look at the facts are absolutely clear. There's a trend here that is going to provide absolutely terrific opportunities. And the way I like to look at these trends is to compare it to the mediums that we're most comfortable with. Today, there are about, depending on who you read, 100 million users on the net. If you compare that to there are 900 million homes worldwide that are TV households. There are 150 million cable users out there. And what's even more surprising is if you take a time measurement of what it took various other mediums to get to a user base of 5 million people globally. It took radio 38 years. It took television 13 years, PCs 16 years to get to a 50 million user base, and it took the net 5 years. So that's the pace. And if you look at the amount of content out there, the beginning of this year we had 30 million web hosts. Today we've got about 39, almost approaching 40 million web hosts out there. So there's just a ton of activity taking place, and it's global. It's really very well spread throughout the world. And we're changing our lives to accommodate this new medium. All the studies show that email is totally ubiquitous today. You get into your office, you answer your voicemail, you rip open your mail, and you spend an average in your office of 30 minutes on email. That's a dramatic change over the last 5 years. You also spend about 18 minutes surfing the net every day at work, and you spend about 7 minutes, this is average, at home surfing the net. And so there's a lot of time that we're now shifting towards this, that either we're replacing because we don't drink as much coffee, or we're not reading as much, or we're not watching as much television, God forbid. It's most probably maybe we're not having other things that we used to enjoy. But I guess there's a dramatic shift now. And if you look at the other forces, besides Moore and Metcalfe, that are supporting what this revolution is all about, it's Bill Gates wants to move the PC saturation in the homes from 40% to 60%. And Metcalfe, Moore support this. We are able to do it. But then we're now reaching these guys that said, I don't ever need this. It's too complicated. It doesn't work. In some respects, they're right. They don't want it. So we're going to have to change things, and I think we're going to have to lower the prices substantially to push this up to 60%. And that brings a whole series of other interactions into play. We're also going to see the rise of information appliances. By the year 2002, there should be about 250 million information appliances out there. And I'm sure you can all venture a guess as to what they are. Maybe the Palm Pilot will have various antennas sticking out of it, and that'll be it. But there are many, many other appliances out there that I could get into. There'll be about $140 billion worth of e-commerce conducted over the net. And I already spoke about the lowering of transaction costs. We're also going to see a dramatic increase in the enhanced customer services and customer support functionality that the net will be used for. And we've already seen this with Cisco, Dell, Amazon. They've started to take the level of competition to the next era. And before long, we're going to see a combination of voice, video, and data being supplied at an extremely low rate. So these facts, I think, speak for themselves. The real trick is now, how do we capitalize on all this? And how do we create an environment for ourselves that utilizes this technology so we can flourish? And from a venture capital perspective, This new digital economy has created a whole new landscape for venture capital as well. I think I've already mentioned one of the changes is that money is readily available. And in order to create a great company today, the supply of money certainly isn't one of the more critical needs in order to make entrepreneurs successful. There's also a new playing field when it comes to technology. And it's a globalization affecting us. You just have to look at the technology teams available anywhere in the world that are prepared to work for much lower rates than we pay in North America, who will very quickly get to grips with new technology. And the competition from a VC's perspective or from the entrepreneur's perspective is absolutely fierce. The half-life of a good idea is much shorter than it used to be. And one can be sure that if you have a good idea, the competition, which will be well-financed, will be well-organized, will be competitive in their technology, will be up your rear view, will be in your rear view mirror, ready to go up your tailpipe in a very, very short order. So this starts to place a much more greater emphasis on the people and the teams that you have to get engaged in order to put these business strategies together. They need to be capable, they need to have some experience, and they have to be able to stay ahead of the competition. That's going to be really the critical differentiator. And building these teams is certainly, from my perspective, the most complex aspect of taking the ideas and creating great companies. And I think it'll be worth my while just to discuss Silicon Valley with you for a few minutes, because this is where we've seen the most amazing amount of success in being able to go out there and create great teams. And I think this is what we ought to strive to create right here in our own backyard, because the Valley has been the greatest example of capitalism, I think, in history. They've had the most astounding outpouring of ideas, of products, and this machine is still in overdrive. If anything, the stature and the amount of capital flowing into the Valley hasn't stopped. In 1997, they increased the flow of VC monies into young companies in the Valley by 60%, 60. A third of all VC monies in the US that was invested went into this little corridor. And it's up this year, much less so, I mean, just slightly up from the previous year. But still, it's an enormous amount of dollars going into this small area. And the money seems to follow the ideas, and the money flows along with the money. And what do we have here? We have a corridor that's 50 miles long with 7,000 companies crammed into it. And you have access to an amazing pool of talent, whether they be programmers, engineers, marketers, and they've got an infrastructure set up from the legal aspects to the marketing aspects that can take a concept and idea into a company almost overnight. The other thing that they have is an almost unmatched availability of venture capital. And it's not only venture capital, it's money that comes from venture capital and from large organizations. In addition to that, they seem to have a climate that really rewards risk takers. And you can tell they reward risk takers because they're very tolerant of failures. If you're in the Valley, if you want to raise money and if you had a couple of failures, that's a big, big plus as opposed to a negative. And it's interesting that this really is in the personality and the character of this environment. And you would think if you had so many people all crammed into this little area, it would stifle creativity. It would create so much competition that they wouldn't be able to grow and flourish. But yet it seems to do the opposite. And it continues to enhance itself. So the most recent example is this warp speed flight towards e-commerce. And in the Valley, you got startups like Amazon.com, eLoan, AutoWeb.com. And what's interesting about all these startups is that all these guys are doing the same thing. They're devising ways of cutting out the middlemen, of speeding up the product cycles by connecting buyers and sellers. It's all about this transaction costs. And clearly, all these companies can't succeed. But what's happened in this area, it's a sheer magnitude of these startups that seems to be essential for the creative process to keep going. This is the only area, and there are other areas, but this area in particular gives these startups a wonderful chance to prove themselves. And so the bright ideas get churned, and through a failure you get smart people who've now done it before, come out the other side, and now they're really set to do the next one. And that's the way it works. It's not only the cash, it's not only the bright ideas. There's a constant churn of innovation, and it creates a talent pool, an availability of seasoned people that are really willing to take the risk. And the entrepreneurs that are successful, there seems to be an abundance of wealthy entrepreneurs, and they do the usual thing. They cash in, and they're pretty flush for a while, and you go out and you get a new house, and then you get a boat, and then you play a lot of golf, and 3 weeks go by, 4 weeks go by, a month, 2, and to hell with it. You got money in your pocket, and you got this business in your veins, and you go back and you either do another startup or you invest in another. It's all about reinvesting. There are very, very few entrepreneurs who've done well who just kind of go to the beach. Oh, they do go to the beach. Yeah, maximum 6 months. And then they're back at it. And even though there's this abundance of capital in the Valley, it still seems to have almost an ironic consequence as to the way venture capital companies started to have so much capital. The average size of their investment was about $5.5 million. So they really couldn't pay enough attention to the smaller deals and the seed deals. So all these small fry kind of guys needed a financing source, and a group of execs got together. They now number about 120. They call themselves a band of angels, and they started investing money in all the smaller seed deals. And today this group, and there's several, but this particular group has invested in about 65 deals. They've invested $1 to $2 million a month for the last 2.5 years. So it continued to fuel the innovative drive that you find. Another interesting aspect of the Valley is you think that all the larger companies that have spurred on this innovation, the Microsofts, Intel, Cisco's, more in the Valley. In most other industries, if you started to see these very large companies, behemoths, emerge, this almost signaled a maturing of the industry and a slowdown of the innovative process. And in the Valley, it's absolutely not true. In fact, it's the reverse. The larger companies have got tons of money that are backing innovation. Intel has invested in 125 startups. That's North America wide over the last couple of years. Microsoft has acquired or invested in about 50 different companies just over the last year. And the association that these smaller companies have with these larger organizations gives them a tremendous amount of leverage. It gives them huge resources that they can draw on. And if they're smart enough, it gives them some kind of marketing clout. And the larger companies that have gone back into these areas have looked at these investments as spreading some R&D money around. Intel's invested not only in microchip design type companies, but in people who are designing internet communities and internet email structures. And they call it the equivalent of Bell Labs. It's betting on several technologies in order to make sure they don't miss out on the next big mover or the next big thing. And that's the Valley environment. And the real question is, how can we create it here? What do we need? Because really it's no more than a state of mind. It's a state of mind where there's a constant churn of fresh talent, where every day smart people who are either engineers or MBAs get up, they pretty much cast caution to the wind, and they go start the next Yahoo. And I think it's this startup dream that's alive and well and keeps this creativity in high gear. And I think as a venture capitalist, my role is to figure out what can we do to create this infrastructure here? What do we have to focus on, and what are the necessary attributes? So I've been in venture capital for 12 months, and I can tell you what I've learned. I focus, and I've already said this, on building the teams. You have to have the right people in place, and often it's a synergistic mix of individuals, and there are many critical issues, and I can't go into it all right here. But a team that can cope with a level of change, that can adopt, that can evolve, because if an internet company is going to be criticized, you cannot possibly say you had a business model and 12 months later we're not adhering to the business model. In fact, the contrary is true. If you want to succeed, you need to adapt and change. And it's not only to survive, it's actually to thrive in the business. You have to constantly evolve this business model. And we help companies build these actual models. So we would go through the process of making sure that the companies that we're involved with would understand, for instance, globalization. We've got a very close association with a group of real entrepreneurial guys in Europe who launch internet-related companies. They launched NetGravity, they launched Andromeda, they've launched Vignette, and these are the leaders in this area. So because of our association with them, we understand very clearly how you can launch on a global basis. And whereas old-style economy, you could launch on a national or a regional basis, I believe you have to become global very, very quickly in order to succeed with an internet company today. And we understand this timing process real well. So we can open up our network and open up our Rolodex. Between us, we've been in this industry for God knows how long, and leverage the type of partnerships and the type of strategic alliances you want, so that it's not the critical mass you're striving for any longer, it's just critical timing. I'd say in the PC days of me starting a company that was selling software products, we had a 3 to 5 year time period in which to scale. Today, I don't believe that you've got 2, maybe 3 years in order to scale an operation before you would really have to understand that there's going to be some gorilla come into your marketplace, and you better be that gorilla. Otherwise, timing is tough and things can become very difficult if you're not going to dominate a particular niche or a particular category. And if you aren't going to succeed at that, you've got to partner or merge or look to be acquired or acquire something else very, very quickly to stay clear of the timing. And because we have a focus on particularly this segment of business, we don't go out of this. We focus exclusively on this. Our deals are in this area. We invest in this area. We go to the trade shows, or more importantly, we go to the conferences in this area, understand what's going on and what are the most significant trends. I believe we add a ton of value. And I wasn't able to give you any clear proof until about 6 months ago when we came up with a concept. We went to hire an engineering team that was going to engineer the product and build this organization with us. And the first 5 engineers that joined us, half of them are from this institution that ended up in the Valley. They moved back to Toronto, and I'd love for you to check out for it. In February, we'll be launching the company. So we've actually reversed the trend. They're moving up north. And here we are doing this kind of stuff. So I think I could go on a while, but I think I'd rather take some questions at this point. And I hope I've given you some insight into what the challenges are for a venture capitalist in this arena. And maybe I've given you a little food for thought of what your roles will be in this new economy. Because I think most of you, I expect or sincerely hope most of you will decide that you're smart, that you're capable, you've got the ability, you have the courage, that you're going to stay here and turn some world-class companies out of this area without the need of an address in Silicon Valley or without the affiliation of any other organization. In fact, I'm kind of envious of your opportunities that you face today, because this institution's got such a terrific history of turning out people like yourself that are well prepared for the future. And I think the future's shaping up to be a real hospitable place for people with your skill set. We need you. We absolutely need you to go out there and use these skills and make the most of these skills. And if you ever think that you need some encouragement to do this, I'd like to leave you with one parting thought. If you believe there aren't opportunities there, think of Gary Larson's Far Side cartoon, because a lot of the guys out there are the same as those pilots turning to one another and saying, why they're mountain goats in these clouds. Thank you. And I'm happy to go ahead.
What do you think the differences are between the venture capital community here in California, say? And do you think there are some kinds of companies in Canada who actually do have to end up going to the States for funding? How are we doing here?
I don't think there are enough of us that are aware of how to assist and provide the value add to early stage companies. And I don't think there are enough VCs in this arena that have the network to satisfy all the needs of a small company. To build a team, it's very difficult to go out and find the people that you need to complement your skill sets. So you need to have some experience in doing these kinds of things. To build a business model, it's best that you've been in the trenches and actually work the company yourself, because that's difficult to do. And to provide the kind of comfort level to early stage entrepreneurs that they are doing the right thing, it's good to have a little gray hair or a little experience in what you've done in the past. And I think that there are few venture capitalists that are into this digital mind space, because you go out and raise $100 million to invest it here. This is, I think, up until the very recent current stage, you had to go invest in a very large variety of different types of industries. And that doesn't give you the ability to focus and get deep into this particular area. That's the problem. Whereas in the Valley, they compete. Here, there's just not enough of us to compete. Go ahead.
I'm trying to help some university researchers for some embryonic startups that are very technology rich, but maybe haven't found their actual final product, or initial product, I guess I should say. And we're talking with some companies about finance. One of the issues is, for the kinds of products we're looking at, there aren't nice market studies by Yankee Group or people like that we can kind of point to when talking to venture capital people to make a better case for the potential for this business. What would you recommend doing in that kind of situation? And I mean, how typical is that? I guess we feel very different to ourselves, but you must see this as a
Yeah, it's a case by case type thing, but and I don't want to be flippant and say you're talking to the wrong people. But there are a lot of people that I feel I know who, depending on which area, would give you a lot of input into what you're doing. They may not finance you, but they would get it quite soon. And that's what I meant by there's just not enough people that are involved in this process. And perhaps it's a good idea for us to begin some kind of, and most probably Vince has already got this well underway, where people who are execs in larger companies who have a specific interest in various areas to orchestrate a liaison between people to either invest at an early stage, seed monies in what you're doing, and I believe there are people in the Waterloo area that do this. But it's clear that you identify people who actually would understand what your particular level of interest is. And you'd be amazed how receptive people are if you just identified people who have common interests. And I think that's one of the goals. Yeah?
I have a follow-up to that. So if you can't value an existing internet company, how do you value an idea?
Oh, valuation. You argue.
So you've got a great idea. You're trying to convince the world they need to invest. If somebody can't look at an existing company and put some value on it, how do they figure out? Is it all sales job?
Yeah. I wish I could give you an exact model for valuing internet companies, and there are people at Goldman Sachs and Robertson Stevens that are writing theses on how do you value these companies. And I think at an early stage, I would be kidding you if I thought there was any kind of model that you could use to value these companies. Generally, the value is placed on the caliber of the management team you put together. and I hate to harp on this, but I'll give you a practical example so that I'm not just talking. There's a company called Ariba that invented, and maybe you know about this company, they invented a purchasing methodology for companies where they could walk into a large organization. They did this with the CIBC, and they said, if you use our methodology, this is your return on investment. And I'm a credible person because look at my track record. Look at the people that I've put into my organization, and he managed to get some very senior executives, 4 or 5 of them, who all took a risk and entered this company at a very early stage and got an advisory board that was 20 people strong. So his valuation automatically shot up, and he got people like CIBC to buy into the idea as he went out and raised money. So that was a smart thing to do. Sometimes it's not possible for some people to do that, so you can't get that valuation. I think the important thing is not to look at how much of this I keep, but how to look at how much access will this financing give me to execute on my ideas. Yeah.
Okay, question, and again, it's coming from the same sort of direction. In my own experience, both at work and both things I've been doing on my own, I've noticed that there's a wide array of opinions as to how much and what kind of numbers one should run through when they're creating a plan, when they're going through a venture idea. I've been told time and time again that, as you said, the team is key, and the track record of the people is key. When you're turning into a product space that has not been explored by mainstream research and really has not been readily quantified by whatever trade media is out there, when do you stop? When do you say, well, I have the numbers I need now, I can move on, and then pick things up as I'm going along?
So the question is, when do you forget about these numbers because they're not meaningful anyway?
How many numbers are enough? What of the,
it's not the magnitude of the numbers, it's the quality. And it's the quality of the research. And for me, it takes me literally 10 minutes to figure out what research or what thought process went into developing these numbers. All the way from people that walk in and it's the basic asset test. Can you give any away? Well, if you qualify that, then you should start to get into how much could we actually sell. And it's thinking it through. What have you created here? How many people could you possibly sell it to? At what price? And at what level of activity it would take to sell these people this stuff? So if you're going into an area that's totally new, once again, you've got to get to the people that understand this area to be able to quantify. These are the only people you're going to get to be comfortable enough to take the risk and go into it with you. If it's an area that anyone would understand, it's just pure research into how you get these numbers. And there are numbers. It's just how you deciphered them and how you've thought this through, not the quantity. I don't know if that... No, there's no perfect answer. But I can assure you, more experienced business plan readers, it doesn't take long to figure out how smart the people are that put these numbers together and what kind of work went into anticipating how much money would be spent on research, how much money would be spent on marketing, promotions in order to get this into the next level. And in addition to that, if we've identified strategic partners, alliances that you could possibly make, that goes a long way. And back that up by some kind of research that you've done. If you want to align yourself with a Cisco, if you understand the program that Cisco have in place for aligning themselves with your type companies, that goes a long way in making people feel a lot more comfortable. And it's not hard to get that information.
It seems like the whole Sandhill BC group is pretty incestuous. And I would imagine it's a lot easier to get coverage in Upside or Red Herring if you've got Kleiner Perkins behind you than some non-Valley end of BC. For a Canadian BC type of entity, how do you sort of tap into that self-referencing group of people that control, to some extent, the media and everything else in terms of coverage of the company?
Persistence. And I can tell you that the last thing the Red Herring want to do is another story about Kleiner Perkins, because boy, we're going to vomit about the next story on Kleiner. They want to hear about new stuff. Yeah. They're as anxious to meet you as you most probably are to meet them. They're dying to meet the next great opportunity they can have first crack at. And media, Yeah, you need a little experience to get the introductions, and then I think it's more persistence than anything else. But if I tell you the amount of money, I'm sorry, this is one of my pet topics, the amount of money that's been wasted on stupid, idiotic marketing ideas and PR companies in this industry is insane. You just have to find someone who knows their way around, and they'll get you to red herring, and most probably it's easy to get upside. And then there are several dozen smaller magazines that never ever get Kleiner Perkins coming to them that would be perfect for you. And once you get an article in one of those, you can then send that to Tony Perkins and he'd get all excited because he'd say, well, why didn't we get the scoop on this? Media is the media. They're kind of the same.
Would you recommend working with a local, like a Toronto area PR firm, or like are there Toronto-based PR firms who have Valley experience?
Truthful answer? No. They're very few. They're very few. But there are lots of independents, tons of independents in the Valley that will get you that kind of exposure. And that's not difficult to get. And I think you don't quite realize the reputation that Waterloo has out there. And you can actually use the name to get you through a lot of the maze that you have to travel. And after you've worked with a few of them, make sure that we train a few people here so then we'll have that network. Yeah?
My name is Jim McFarland. I represent one of those small emerging companies that has developed an internet application that's focused on channels management and resolving and managing business issues around it. We're at the pilot stage. A half hour before this meeting, coming to this meeting, I just signed off with KPMG to do the first round, for the first round of venture capital financing, or at least search for it at this particular point in time. So we're right at that stage where we are now just going out to the market. Some of the questions that I had, we've touched on them, but essentially I'll go to the last question on since we're out in the marketplace now introducing ourselves to the VC community, beyond what we've done, which is essentially gone through the process of a number of large accounting firms and capital agents, and have selected KPMG on this offering. What are some of the other activities that we can do to enhance our exposure or visibility in the marketplace at this point in time beyond public relations firms?
That's a good question. I think it's a question of doing your own research to make sure that you understand who are the potential VCs out there, to keep on top of KPMG, they actually have all this research, and I would suggest you do your own investigation as to which are the firms most likely to invest in you, which are the ones that have an interest and understanding of what this is. And I don't know if the publicity is going to make that much of a difference to how fast or how much people would invest. I think you'd have to spend most of your time. You've already chosen KPMG as your agent, working with them to make sure you're spending your time in the right place. I think it's critical if you want to generate publicity. You understand where you can generate that publicity, and there are actually a lot of magazines. There's a lot of areas where you can get quite a lot of play. There's organizations like Vince's. There's organizations in Toronto that have monthly meetings, weekly meetings, where you can get to speak, where you can get to air your views and give your company's program that you should pursue quite aggressively. And that hopefully will get smaller and lesser known VCs or potential financiers to come to the table. I think KPMG is a good choice. They've got a good group in Toronto that really know the environment. I would just make absolutely sure they give you enough attention and take you to the right people.
It's in our research that we've done, and looking at, we're a brand new category, and we're looking for competition. We've since found two, both U.S. based, both have early VC financing that is, and one got 5.5 U.S. and one received 8.1 U.S. Virtually, the technology advancement that they were at was minimal compared to the technology advancement that invested. Americans tend to be more early investors than sort of Canadians, based on the conversations we've had today. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. I mean, this is part of what I'm speaking about here. I don't know how to change this. You know, I think there's half a dozen guys that I know that invest early stage. With a proposal like yours, I was being as courteous as possible. I was trying to tell you, don't waste your time, because you'll do endless presentations to people who will never invest at your stage. So be very specific about where you go and be practical. Ask yourself the hard questions. These are the guys that invest in very early stage. That's where I should go. Find out companies that have a lot of synergy with your type of, and I can take this offline and give you a whole bunch of people that most probably would be comfortable in taking a look at what you have. Sorry.
Can you speak a little bit more about building the team that you need in your company to really attract some VC?
Sure. I thought I'd spoken too much about that. But what I found is that it's very difficult to have people build the right kinds of teams. And at the companies that I've got to manage in some way, I've always told people the essential ingredient of a team to be successful, it's got very little to do with the outside world out there. It's most probably got to do with one fundamental thing, and that's trust. And the challenge is to find an engineering entrepreneur that trusts the person who's going to go out and do sales. Very, very complex, because these people, if they've got a lot in common, either one of them is no good. And I can hear Randall, are you falling asleep or laughing? Because he would have appreciated, I mean, this is old hat to him, because he deals with this all day long. And to find how you're going to get the engineering folks to believe that the marketing guys will ever get the message, because they're not technical enough. But the trick is, you got to find a synergistic group that'll all work together harmoniously to make this happen. And that's when, if you look at what's happening now, there are lots of industries that have no idea, really no idea, how they're going to be affected by this digital revolution. The trick for me is to go find guys who've got it and match them up with engineers. And the most difficult part about this at the first meeting is how they get to trust one another. The legal profession is going to undergo a tremendous, amazing transformation. Well, these are the most jaded, skeptical people in the world. How do they trust the IS people? And clearly now it's becoming more of an issue, because Chambers, who runs Cisco, decided he was going to give his IS department 3.5% of his total revenue as an expense line to go spend on building their new strategy. And I think it's tough to find management like that would trust their IS department with that level of expenditure to build their business. Where you find them, that's a kind of a difficult process. I'm sorry, there we go.
Regarding geography, like, what do you see as the expanding area in Canada that's going to be the future Silicon Valley North? And do you see it as a disadvantage for Canada to have so many different little spots all across the entire map that are technology-centric? Like, we've got Ottawa, we've got Toronto, we've got Waterloo, and like even Quebec and Vancouver. Does having it spread out so much, is that a negative influence for bringing people back from the States or keeping them here?
I think the best chance we got is this corridor, because here we got the engineering capability and the talent, and Toronto we have the money.
So you're saying
And I think around here is where we have the best single opportunity to make this thing happen. And if I look at trying to emulate what other people have done and been really successful, we need a more dense environment. It seems to me that the more closely people are packed into one area, the greater the innovation and the greater the creativity that comes out of these areas. What I need to do is get people like yourself to begin to discuss this with others and create a state of mind that will just be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think this area has the best chance. You know, I don't think it's going to be extremely difficult to do this in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, any one of these other areas. There's just not a starting point. Yeah.
If you have a product and you go to a venture capitalist, how much control do you lose? I mean, like, he's investing like 90, 95% of the capital, and you're playing someone else's money, do you have a say anymore? I mean,
Absolutely. I would only go, there's one thing is the business deal. And the business deal you'd have to construct, and there are many aspects of the business deal. But I would only go to a venture capitalist that I was comfortable with, that had the intellect to give me some guidance. And I'd give him enough control as much as I trusted his ability to give me sound, solid, good advice. Because frankly, the way this works right now is you have the knowledge base. In fact, this is a new environment where the assets of the company walk out the door at 5 o'clock. So what real control has he got? If you don't want to work anymore, well, that's it. He's going to lose his money. And he's not going to be able to have anything at the end of the day. So you have to choose someone that you feel comfortable with and you think is going to be able to give you this boost, not only in finance, but in also understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve.
But if you're like building a
So-
team and all that, and then, you had the idea, but are you any good? Are you like, is there any, what use are you afterwards? Can't they throw you out and they got a better team? There's people who are smarter than you. Like,
Most probably not. Most venture capitalists, I don't think, are smarter than the intrapreneur. Besides which, they don't want to get into the operational role. They want to invest and provide strategic guidance.
my question is, can't they replace you with other people? Like, once they have your idea, can't they just pick smarter people?
Smart venture capitalists will only replace you with other people if it's for your own good. Often you need to be replaced. Many people with smart ideas can't manage businesses. And that's just a fact. So you've got to find someone that you feel is going to be a partner, as opposed to someone that's going to be vying to get rid of you. And that's getting a comfort level with the people out there. And that's my theme. There have to be more of us. You may never trust me, but I hope that you find a venture capitalist that you do trust, or find partners that you trust, so you can create whatever idea you have into a wonderful business. It'll help me eventually. It's a longer answer if you want to delve into it.
Dennis, I'd like to say something that's going to be harder for you to say, given what you're trying to do here, is that kind of thinking, I think, that owner-operator mentality, in fact, is our Waterloo, Canada, whatever, greatest problem. I actually believe that, because in California, the idea is, people in 10 years are going to do 3 startups. If they fail to be the ones who lead that startup, they actually get something out and do their next one. There's a very different mentality about the linkage of a person to a company in California than here. And it's a heritage I think we've inherited here from our previous entrepreneurial generation that was family business and owner-operated. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but that's kind of harder for you to say.
No,
because you're in that VC role, and there's a perception of conflict. I mean, what you're really trying to say is the goal congruence there.
I don't understand the history nearly as well as Randall would. But if there is this owner-operator mentality, I think it's no longer practical to adopt that with the pace of business that you have to compete with in this new economy. And yeah, I agree with Randall. He's almost probably got more experience than me in dealing with a lot of these things.
So it sounds like what you're both saying is that if you're an entrepreneur with an idea, you should have no problems with founding the company, getting a piece of the action, and walking away.
Right. I mean,
Well, no. I mean, I don't think that should be your goal, to walk away.
Not your goal, but if that's...
But clearly, what you have to do if you want to build a company is give up certain pieces of control. We were speaking earlier to Wes. He said that when he started, it was difficult for him to understand what options were all about and what many of the legal facets were of starting a business and running a business. Frankly, for me, the engineering side is extremely complex for me because I have no engineering degree whatsoever. I learned this on the fly. So my goal was always to find engineering teams that I could partner up with. And depending on what your skill set is, you'd have to partner up with others. Eventually, businesses grow and circumstances change. And you should always realize that it's the mission or the vision of the business or this company that you created that should be foremost in your mind as opposed to your own personal interest. And eventually you have to create an entity that's much larger in scope than you. That's the goal. And it's the egos. ultimately, and idiotic personal things that get in the way, and you'd be surprised.
If I can just jump in there for a minute, that's exactly right. It's ego, it's a question of ego, that's the issue, because like in our own circumstances, the position that I'm in is I'm a shareholder, and then I'm an employee. It's plain and simple. And as a shareholder, I have to sit on the same table, or the same side of the table as the VC, the person I've given equity to, and take a look at what creates shareholder value, period. As an employee, then it becomes a question, is there someone better suited to do the job function I'm doing? If there is, then it's in the best interest of the company to bring that person in, and then I need to assume another role or move on. And that's where you have to clearly define, at least in my opinion, yourself into two groups. One is you're a shareholder, and one is you are an employee, and what happens is the ego gets in the way, and that's where the conflict between those two roles comes into play.
Absolutely right.
We'll take one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts or opinions on how to build that advisory board? Before you go for financing and all that sort of thing, it's great to have a good group of people with experience to use as a sounding board. Where do you find those people?
I think it's a question of being entrepreneurial. There's most probably lots of people you'd wish to have on your advisory board, but wouldn't have the gall to ask them, and you'd be shocked at the answer. In this area, I would bug Randall as much as I could, because he's got most probably the best Rolodex here. Say, if he wouldn't do it, he'd most probably give you half a dozen other people that most likely would.
Okay, I'd like to thank our speaker today for giving, I think, a very interesting talk, and I want to thank you all for a very interesting discussion afterwards. I really enjoyed your questions and the answers that were provided, and I'd like to show our appreciation to our speaker.